This video was brought to you by our favorite subscriber of the week, Josh Francis. How you doing, Josh? I've known your father Derek for a very long time, and you're both good people by my book. So take care of yourself, mate, and on with the show. Hi and welcome back to the channel. I bought these two pictures, one of Kim Novak and one of Ava Gardner, at a thrift store the other day. Got them cheaply, but they're kind of old school portraits, so I thought I would buy them and I thought I'd use them in a video, and now that they're in this video I'm going to get rid of them so the camera doesn't focus on their faces instead of mine. That hopefully is much better, because this camera has a tendency to focus on any face except mine. Anyway, this time around we're going to be looking at Lost World movies. Now, Lost World movies started out at the early part of cinema with, in fact, The Lost World, the adaptation of Arthur Conan Doyle's novel about Professor Challenger. And all through the decades, even till now, Lost World movies have been popular and will probably continue to do so. Wakanda in the MCU is a lost world. Shangri-La in the good version of Lost Horizon is a lost world. And I've got 3 water-related Lost World movies that aren't the best movies in cinema history by any means at all. Kind of like the Lost Horizon musical that was done in 1973 by Ross Hunter.
Because they say you're slow, that doesn't mean that you're slow.
But these 3 are entertaining. They're in the 60s and 70s, and even then they were nostalgic for the kind of Lost World movies that were being made in the 1920s, 1930s, and to a certain extent the 1940s. So let's get into the first one, and I've got to work out which one I want to do because I'm kind of tossing up which one I want to do first. Okay, I have made my decision. I'm going to go with 1978's Warlords of the Deep, directed by Kevin Connor, who also directed some other films like At the Earth's Core and Motel Hell, about which I talked on Anthony A. Perez's YouTube channel. And he made Warlords of the Deep, also known as Warlords of Atlantis, depending on which country you were in. So the movie's set in 1898, like all good Lost World movies are, and you've got a ship, the Texas Rose, which is travelling to the Bermuda Triangle to test out a bathysphere which was made by basically Doug McClure, and he and a fellow scientist paid by Peter Gilmore are going to go down into the bathysphere, which has a hollow bottom but the water's kept out by air pressure, and they're going to explore beneath the sea. So they've got a gantry and a derrick to lower it into the water. They've got a little telephone system to hook it up to the surface. And so they're going to test out this bathysphere, not somewhere safe, but out in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle because reasons. Accompanying them is the captain of the ship, played by Shane Rimmer, who was one of those go-to Americans that English cinema had for a very long time. And a couple of other crew members. There are some very dodgy crew members there, one of whom is played by John Ratzenberger, who played Norm in Cheers for a long time, but he had a career as a kind of jobbing character actor in English cinema for a while. So they lower the bathysphere, and the 2 guys are, you got Doug McClure and Peter Gilmore in this little bathysphere, and they kind of go down a certain depth and then get attacked by a plesiosaur, which sticks its head up and through the bottom of the bathysphere and tries to attack them before Doug McClure electrocutes it. That's the start of the film. This is a crazy movie. They also find a statue made out of gold, which they manage to throw a rope around, and the sailors haul it up to the surface, at which point the sailors kind of decide, well, we don't need the bathysphere, we've got a great big gold statue now, so I'll cut the diving bell loose and leave them to their own devices, which is what they try to do. And the bathysphere is sucked into an undersea world, a stone bubble under the sea, which has 7 cities in it and is enormous, and has light for some reason, and has a lot of other things as well. Meanwhile, the Texas Rose is attacked by a giant octopus. and a lot of the sailors are dragged by the octopus into the lost world. None of this makes sense. The special effects are no better than you expect from 1978, but you got to go along for the ride. So all of the so most of the main cast is then washed up on a beach in Malta, because that's where they filmed it, and find themselves in this undersea lost world full of aliens from Mars who were trapped on Earth when their spaceship was pulled into Earth's gravitational pull thousands of years ago. Since then, the aliens have built 7 cities and have enslaved any sailors that came past, because they are not nice people. The main alien they meet is played by Michael Gothard, who you might remember is the guy who pulled his own arm off in Scream and Scream Again. And he's got a kind of dodgy haircut the way all of the master aliens have. And so they travel through this lost world where there are giant mud monsters and there are flying armoured piranhas and a whole bunch of other things, until they finally get to the city where most of the crew is locked up except for the scientist played by Peter Gilmore, because he's an aristocratic looking dude and the aliens want to recruit his brain so that they can get his technological knowledge and use a helmet that lets him see into the future so they can reinvent atomic power and fly back to Mars. I'm not making any of this up. This is what happens in the movie. Meanwhile, Doug McClure sees a cute slave girl and her father, played by Robert Brown, who was one of the guys who played M in the James Bond films. Meanwhile, the leaders of the posh aliens are Daniel Massey, the son of Raymond Massey from Things to Come, and Sid Charisse. Yes, the Sid Charisse who did all of the great musicals in the 1950s, slumming it in 1978, wearing a kind of leotard and a cape, but still with great legs. So they do all this waffly new age stuff about how the aliens have mind powers and how they're naturally superior and how they're going to go back to Mars and all this kind of crap. Never happens, because Doug McClure, being the stalwart two-fisted guy he is, helps the crew, and they head back towards the bathysphere, which is bobbing around in a little bay nearby, and they start heading back, and eventually they escape. So it's got all the usual things you get from a Lost World movie, but with a weird new age looking temple thrown in, which looks a little like a very, very expensive weekend spa. So the monsters are pretty much like the ones in The Land of Time Forgotten, At the Earth's Core, and all of those other two-fisted Doug McClure Lost World movies that the 1970s produced, along with a lot of bad disco music. So it's a lot of fun though. That's the weird thing about it, is you know exactly what it is. The locations in Malta are pretty good, the rocky outcrops and the beaches and things. And they've got some very sketchy looking matte paintings to fill in the Lost World. But the matte paintings are just at that point where they're not offensively bad, but they're kind of cute. And so when you see the matte painting, you go, oh, that's a nice matte painting. And then you just kind of move along from there. So just to kind of finalise on that one, Warlords of Atlantis is fun. And I'm not going to try to deny it. I first saw it at a cinema along the Esplanade in Manly, in Sydney back in the day. I actually went across town and took a ferry across Sydney Harbour to see this movie. And I remember being disappointed with it because there was no nudity, because in 1978 I was looking for nudity in films, and even though it was a Doug McClure action film and I liked it, I thought, there's no nudity in this film, and so I went away disappointed. But I've since matured, and I can appreciate the virtues the movie does have. So if you want to see Warlords of the Deep, otherwise known as Warlords of Atlantis, it's around a couple of streaming services. It may even be on Tubi.tv. One of the other movies I'm going to talk about is, but it's got that kind of 70s exploitation without being offensive kind of vibe about it, and it's a bit of fun because of that. The second one's kid friendly, so you can actually watch it with the kids, so that's kind of cool. In fact, all three of them are kid friendly. What am I doing kid friendly movies? Anyway, the second one is Captain Nemo in the Underwater City from 1969, starring Chuck Connors, Robert Ryan playing Captain Nemo, Nanette Newman, and also Kenneth Connor from the Carry On movies. In fact, this was the last non-Carry On feature film that Kenneth Connor made. Again, you got people being lost off a boat in this one, because it's pretty much the setup for any undersea Lost World movie. A ship crossing the Atlantic from New York to Bristol, or Boston to Bristol, or something like that. So the ship hits an enormous storm in the Atlantic Ocean, and a whole bunch of people are chucked overboard, including a woman and her son and his kitten, which is in a box, fortunately. Two dodgy brothers, played by Bill Fraser and Kenneth Connor. An American senator, played by Chuck Connor. And a very nervous and claustrophobic Englishman, played by Alan Cuthbertson. They fall into the ocean and start sinking, and then are rescued by a whole bunch of scuba divers from the city of Templemere, which is an undersea city that Captain Nemo built. Now, if you were going canonical, Captain Nemo should have been played by someone from India, the way he was in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, because Captain Nemo was an Indian prince called Dakar in canonical Captain Nemo stuff from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. But he's played by Robert Ryan in this one. And I like Robert Ryan because Robert Ryan is doing the next level acting in this movie. Everybody else is not. And he's got like an angry, determined, idealistic, utopian take on Captain Nemo. He's built an undersea city for his followers and their families. He's expanding it. And he has technology that's next level because, of course, he's a genius. So all of these Americans and English people from the 1860s, because he does mention to Chuck Connor's senator that America is currently going through a civil war. So you've got to think like 1862 or something like that. And Captain Nemo wants no part of it. He's got a really groovy submarine. His version of the Nautilus in this one's a little bit sketchy on the special effects and the model work. But it kind of grows on you, and the special effects of this one get better the further you go into the movie. The ship sinking in the storm is very ropey special effects, but then you start getting better and better special effects as the movie progresses. So Alan Cuthbertson plays a mining engineer who's claustrophobic and who ends up trying to destroy the whole city for reasons. Nanette Newman's playing a widowed woman with a young son, played by a young actor who unfortunately doesn't have any charisma at all. Kenneth Connor and Bill Fraser are dodgy guys from England who find out that one of the byproducts of all of the technologies that Captain Nemo has is gold, and the gold is pretty much junk in Templemere. And even though it is, they're very, very anxious to get as much of it as they can because they can't get past that capitalistic gold-based paradigm that they've. Meanwhile, Captain Nemo takes a liking to Chuck Connor's character, who's as stiff as a wooden Indian, because Chuck Connors was always stiff as a wooden Indian. And he really starts explaining Templemere, he starts explaining the technology, he explains he's got a second Nautilus being built, and he explains that they harvest the sea and they have a lot of undersea shots shot very well off the coast of Malta again. Malta was the go-to place to film anything like this in an English movie. And so you see people harvesting crops from the ocean. You see sharks as well. And there's a thing called the mobula, which is a mutated stingray that Captain Nemo's technologies accidentally created, which attacks the city. It's about 150 foot across. It's hostile, and so they've built walls and electric fences and fortifications against this rampaging mutant, which is a threat to the city. Now, here's the interesting thing about this film. All of the humans from the surface are basically the problem. The greedy brothers want to get away so they can grab all the gold and kind of steal things. The Alan Cuthbertson character is claustrophobic and thinks that the dome's going to crack and they're all going to die. And Chuck Connor's senator can't get past the nationalism of his upbringing. And so, aided by Joab, who is the second in command of Captain Nemo's empire, an escape plan is made. Meanwhile, Chuck Connors is attracted to a young woman from Templemere called Marla, played by Luciana Paluzzi, who of course we all know was in Thunderball. She was the bad Bond girl who got killed in Thunderball, who teaches children how to swim, because the first thing you've got to learn in Templemere is how to swim. even though if the dome cracks, you'll probably die instantly. So the production design in this is pretty good. I mean, it didn't have a fantastically large budget, but they managed to create an undersea world with some very effective model work. The city of Templemere is beautifully evoked, and with some really nice set designs. The sets don't look substantial, but they look stylistically right, and I kind of liked. But again, you've got a problem because you don't really see who the characters are before they get thrown off the ship at the start. So all these people are under immense peril, but we don't care because we don't know who they are. It's only later we find out who they are, and most of them are pieces of shit. Nanette Newman's character. Nanette Newman was an actress who was married to Brian Forbes. Let me put it this way. She's not that gifted as an actress. She's pretty, kind of, but she doesn't kind of project well to the screen. The Kitten's probably the most charismatic of that bunch, apart from Robert Ryan. And Robert Ryan, even though he knows he's miscast, and you can tell he knows he's miscast, does a really nice hand at giving us the kind of stern idealism of his version of Captain Nemo. And I kept watching this movie rather than turning it off because of Robert Ryan. I like his Captain Nemo a lot. I think that he's a kind of inspirational leader, and that projects well. He's a technological expert. He's gruff and kind of used to getting his way, which is kind of understandable given the circumstance. To a modern audience, at least, and I don't know how it would have played to an adult audience in the 1960s, but to a modern audience, we're on the side of Captain Nemo. Build your underwater cities and stay away from politics and nationalism and warfare and angry people and the kind of people who will blow up a city because they're feeling nervous. The politics in this one kind of travels in an interesting way. Angela Morley's music is very evocative. It kind of works well, and it's a little higher level than you usually get for this kind of movie. But yeah, I kind of liked it. But Robert Ryan definitely made this one for me, and I enjoyed rewatching it, though I probably won't need to watch it again. And Kenneth Connor, playing his usual kind of nervous, not too bright character, does his usual nervous, not too bright character quite well. And he gets a little bit of a character arc there as well. Nonetheless, it's of its time. It was a Saturday matinee kind of movie. I may well have seen it on in fact, I'm fairly sure I did see it on a Saturday matinee at the cinemas back in the late 60s, because I was doing that every weekend almost. But yeah, it's probably not going to play well to a modern bunch of kids, but for those of us who are of a certain age, it's worth revisiting. The third one is a 1973 Filipino-American production, directed by Eddie Romero, who directed a whole bunch of kind of exploitation films in the Philippines in the 1960s and 1970s. It stars Patrick Wayne, John Ashley, George Nader, and the ubiquitous in Filipino cinema Vic Diaz, and it is Beyond Atlantis. This one's got an interesting backstory to it, and I kind of liked reading the backstory, and it explains so much about the film. The story's pretty simple. Vic Diaz plays Manuel, a guy, an islander from an island in the Philippines, who once every couple of months transports supplies on his boat to an island where the only person he ever sees is a beautiful woman called Cyrene, who pays him in pearls. So Manuel takes the pearls to Manila, where he sells them to East Eddie, played by the wonderful Sid Haig, who is a businessman along the waterfront, who also runs a string of sex workers and seems to own a nightclub or two. Sid Haig is the most valuable player in this movie. He meets up with a friend of his, played by John Ashley, who's a gambler and aspirational idiot, who he gets to evaluate the pearls, and they're apparently Tuscarora pearls, which is not a real thing. But each one of them is worth a lot of money, and so they want to find out from Manuel where he got the pearls from and organise an expedition there. They get a diver to help them, played by Patrick Wayne, the talentless son of John Wayne, who looks very pretty, and in fact he did a Ray Harryhausen Sinbad movie, but he couldn't act his way out of an improv troupe. He's good looking, but he's incredibly stiff. There's a lot of stiff people in these movies I'm talking about this time. And so they find out from Manuel where the island is. They go to the island, and find out that Cyrene is the daughter of Nereus, the last descendants of Atlantis. And according to the tribal law, she's got to mate with a human being, even though she's not human, because she can stay underwater indefinitely. And all the other people in the tribe on the island have big fishy eyes, and so apparently to keep the bloodline pure, she's got to mate once with a human being fairly soon, otherwise the species will go extinct. Now, I don't understand the reason for that. My theory is that because she's not human, what she probably does is makes love with a human being, lays about 50 or 60 eggs in a tidal pool, and they hatch and become new islanders. That's the only reason. It's the only way that I think this can work. There's no evidence in the movie of this, but then the movie's world building is at best rudimentary. So along with a female archaeologist, the intrepid crew reach the island, make some deals with the locals, find a pool full of cannibal fish. And cannibal fish aren't a real thing either, but they couldn't say piranhas because they're actually in the Philippines rather than the Amazon. Everybody is kind of imperiled by this tribe while the greedy capitalists reenact the treasure of the Sierra Madre in a Filipino location. Now, the music in this one is pretty dull, but the locations are good. It's good to see the Filipino actors getting a go. You do see some scenes shot in Manila in sleazy nightclubs, at a cockfighting ring. Not very graphic, fortunately, but you do see real locations as they were in the 1970s, which is kind of interesting. And the movie was actually shot in the backside by Patrick Wayne. Many years later, the people involved with it, including Eddie Romero and John Ashley, told the story that Patrick Wayne wanted the movie to be PG rated because he didn't want to be involved in a movie that wasn't PG rated. In which case I would have ditched him and got Doug McClure. But they persevered with it, and the movie did not do well at all because people seeing an exploitation movie from the Philippines, they expected something like all the movies in Machete Maidens Unleashed, the documentary about the American Filipino movies of the 1970s, which I recommend as well, which required it to have a lot of gore and a lot of nudity. This movie has neither of those things. It is limited by the fact that they're keeping things very PG rated, even though the basic concept is that this princess of the island needs to get laid. Now, Nereus is played by George Nader, an American actor from the 50s who was a bit of a beefcake actor, but he wasn't a bad actor at all. The problem is that his career was 86 because he was gay and in a long-term relationship. He was a close friend of Rock Hudson's. In fact, he and his husband were the beneficiaries of Rock Hudson's will because they nursed him through his final illnesses. And so in the 1960s, George Nader went to Europe, where he made a whole bunch of kind of FBI crimi movies based on a German character called Jerry Cotton, who was an FBI agent. The Jerry Cotton movies are fantastic to watch, and George Nader is good in them, tongue very much in cheek. He was very good at doing kind of light comedy stuff. But in this one, he's got a chin beard. It's his last acting role, by the way, in a movie. And he's playing King Nereus. He's pretty fit for his age. He's got to be around 60 at the time, but he's quite fit. And he's given some very clunky dialogue to give to the camera. So I can understand why his heart wasn't in it particularly. But I always liked George Nader because I think he was an honest actor whose sexuality really impeded his career. He could have gone on to do other things. Wasn't given the opportunity for all the wrong reasons. But Beyond Atlantis has got a lot of good underwater photography filmed in the Philippines as well. And there are a lot of people holding their breath for a long time in this film. Some of them while wearing fisheye masks. It kind of works, but it doesn't work. It needed to go further than it did. But that stick in the mud, Patrick Wayne demanded that it be PG. And because they needed a name actor to sell it to American markets, John Ashley himself wasn't a name actor because all he'd done was a bunch of beach party movies. It didn't quite work, but I've got a weird fondness for it for some reason because Sid Haig, he gets all the best lines. He knows what kind of movie he's in. He's trying to punch it up a little bit and punch up the energy levels. But it doesn't work because he's dragged down by a lot of other actors who are very, very stiff. So that's it for the 3 underwater or water-related Lost World movies that I've got. Let me know what you think of them. If you enjoyed them, let me know. Let me know if you've seen them even. And if you haven't, you can probably scout around and find them on various platforms, usually in streaming services. So anyway, look after yourselves. Watch some good Lost World movies. Watch some bad Lost World movies. Stay safe. Keep your powder dry. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/paleocinema. You can also give me a subscription, a like. You can hit the notification bell and leave a comment. That's it for this time around. I'm working up to doing a live stream sometime soon. So all of you people up in the Northern Hemisphere, stay warm, and I'll catch you next time.